Hey everyone, super excited to be here. Data Team Summit. I want to send a huge thank you for creating this platform for myself and my friends here to talk about data, the thing we love so much. We're about to have a really good time. If you've come here, you know the title of our panel is What Happens When Your Infrastructure Does Not Scale Anymore? Whether you're a small startup or a mega large company, you're going to come across some scale issues at one point. It's going to be painful. It's going to be unfun. But if you figure it out, it can be fun. And so these three awesome people that I brought in, when I heard about this opportunity to do this panel, these are the people I thought of. I was like, how can I talk to people from different angles of this problem? And I think what makes this panel really unique is that we have three levels of the organization to give like a holistic view of that. Because many times it takes a holistic team. Data is a team sport to do this. So to show you those awesome levels, for the first person we have Sarah Floris. She is a senior data ML engineer, and she is the founder of Dutch Engineering. For my other guests, I have Richad Nieves-Becker, who is the senior associate VP of data science at Revantage. And then finally, I have Doremus, who's the chief technology officer of Magenta Care Continuum. And so really excited to have you all here, share your insights. And remember, if you have any questions at all, please put it in the Q&A. We'll try to get to it during the time here or afterwards. In addition, connect with us on LinkedIn as well to ask questions. Many of us are really excited about data and happy to always chat. So are y'all ready to get started with this panel?
Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do it.
Maybe? No, I'm just kidding.
Maybe. Okay, well, we will ask you first then, Richad. So let's kick off our first question. So what are the early signs that your data infrastructure isn't scaling anymore? And specifically, what is the impact you see on the technology, the product roadmap, and the data teams themselves? I'm gonna kick this first off to Sarah.
Yeah, so this is like a problem that I see on a regular basis, right? You're scaling, you're a small startup, you're a medium company, you're scaling, and suddenly you get all of these warnings from places. And that's hopefully only if you have, monitoring. Otherwise, it just your pipelines just start crashing, your data is stale, and that's the things that you see on a regular basis when you are when your infrastructure doesn't scale anymore. And so when I see it as a data platform engineer, I am, immediately alerted to that. And then I have to go in and do those reactive changes. And it becomes a very much more reactive environment, which is not always the best way to approach these problems, right? So the first thing that I always typically want to do when I start a new data project or things like that, have monitoring. And so that's what usually the first sign is, getting those monitors, having those alerts set up, right? And so that's really what happens. You start having a lot of people, customers, stakeholders, leaders of, like Ben, come to you and be like, hey, like what is happening to my data? And so you don't often, so that often happens. So the first one is a backup, right, of logs. That's what you all see in the data teams. You'll get a lot of folks who are we can't take on any more requests because we are being so reactive in our responses to the data pipelines. And then
I want to highlight that.
What?
I want to highlight that point you made right there, though, because that I think is actually the big warning sign you get that stuff isn't failing, is that no other projects are getting done. Everyone's spending their time being reactive. And maybe you're not getting, warnings up the wazoo. Maybe you're just having to fulfill a ton of ad hoc requests because everything else isn't fulfilling the needs of the team or anything. But you can really just look at the velocity of the backlog and be like, oh, something's not working the way it's supposed to anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you felt that on the floor as well.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, all the time. A lot more than I'd like to admit. And then the other thing is so basically the projects are not getting done. You'll see the technology also giving warning signs. You'll see leaders starting to complain, but you'll also see sometimes you'll see like, customers come in and talk about what is happening. And that is usually like when you have like an embedded analytics product. And so those are the things that I would definitely like watch out for. Like, what are your data engineers doing? What are your data scientists doing, right? Making sure data analysts, what are their complaints? And a lot of the time you'll hear a common theme, and that's, like the queries are taking slower than they're supposed to be. And then, the data engineers are not getting my work. Like I'm not receiving those of the data for those ad hoc requests. And so those are definitely something you have to, like Ben said, you have to really watch out for. So
those sound like the right kind of problems that a mature software organization will have when you've got all of this set up. I come from a lot of these scrappier startup worlds, and failure looks a little different there because there just ain't no way you're going to automate everything. And there's not even a way to know what the future is going to look like to know how to scale. But you'll know it's not working when your manual tasks start overloading any of the actual progress that you want to make on things. There's one of the companies I was at before, we built a pipeline that was like everything was automated except the original load of the data. You just have to load the data in the database, then you click a button and everything else is taken care of. And then we had a full-time person just loading data into the database. It's like, ooh, we missed something kind of important, didn't we? So sometimes it's like everything's working, everyone's fine, all of our parts are working, but if you step back and take a look at how the organization overall is performing and be like, is everybody being used to their highest and best use? Sometimes you just got to pause and ask that question. Otherwise,
or
we'll just
you gotta wait till someone goes on vacation and then
yes. Yes.
Real quick, I want to bring in Richad because I think you have a really interesting perspective. Because from our earlier conversations, you've already told me how you really enjoy mentoring and this managerial component of this. When you're facing these situations, how do you work with your direct reports when things are being very reactive and you're starting to feel that crunch of things?
That's a great question. Yeah, I was going to mention that one thing that hasn't been touched on yet is the effect on the conversations that you're having with your direct reports. Often when I'm talking to them, I'll ask them, okay, what in the last week or 2 weeks have you been enjoying about the work? What have you not been enjoying? And by and large, at least everyone I've ever hired, they hate being reactive. And so if they're drawn into that work, it really drains them and you can see it on their face. So that's like, I don't know if it's the first sign that I see, but it's like the most important one to me because I'm thinking, oh, this person is not utilizing their strengths right now. And so we have to fix it also from a talent retention perspective, because too many orgs, especially on the larger side, get stuck being reactive for too long a period. And then the thing that the person who was hired, the thing that they expected to do isn't actually what they're doing. And over time, they're going to get bored and annoyed of that. And they're going to think the grass is greener on the other side. And sometimes they're right. But it feels like a preventable problem. Another sign you'll see is that the product roadmap becomes more of like a wish list. You have, okay, we want to do this thing, which will then lead to this thing and be by this quarter, right? And then eventually they'll keep getting pushed. So you'll see that in longer term strategic planning discussions where you're like, well, we had to push all these things out. And if you're doing internal services, kind of like what we do, then you don't have like necessarily customers breathing down your neck, but you do have, high level stakeholders, executives breathing down your neck. If you're trying to fix something reactive with your people, I mean, essentially you pair when necessary, to fix it. That's often what I'll do. For example, a lot of people trying to fix a problem, they will get tunnel vision and sort of stuck in how they're thinking to solve it, even down to the way that they Google search or look on Stack Overflow. And so sometimes if you have two people pairing, the other person can research, one person can be writing code while the other looks things up. Oh, this is a better way to do this. This is a better way to do that. This is why this is happening. I find that if you're doing reactive problem solving, having two people on it is 4x more productive, I found. Yeah, that's my number one recommendation, is to do pairing just to get another set of eyes on the problem.
I loved your point too about the separation between the roadmap and reality. being a thing. I've also seen that comes into play when you start getting your roadmap that is so far ahead of where you currently are. It's like we can't even imagine how to get from where we are to where we want to be. So we're just going to keep dreaming, and it moves farther and farther away. And you can't even see how to iterate there. So you have these year-long goals that you have to meet. Oh, we're going to be a totally decentralized organization, and everyone's going to have federated data that they can access and do whatever they want with. How? Right? Like, you're telling me something's broken by making that your dream, but you're not telling me how to get there. And that is a for sure sign that you're not in a good spot.
That how, I think, is a great segue for our second question. So for our second question, scaling often puts you within the build versus buy debate to meet your new data needs. As a leader, how do you navigate through this decision while also accounting for the needs of your growing data team? I'm gonna kick that over to you, Ben.
Sure. So this is a very easy question and a very hard one at the same time. If you've got a wide open budget, you've got the options of doing whatever you want. If you have constraints, then you got to figure out what's the most valuable. And I think this really comes down to a philosophy, who you are as a company. You look at this with like the cloud, right? Why is the cloud so popular? Because people don't want to be managing their own infrastructure. That's not the strength of their business. They don't want that taking up their brain space. They want to focus on solving the problems and just have computers exist so that they can use them. Yeah, it's more expensive, but sometimes that's worth it. You know, it's not all just a cost thing. It's who are you? What is the thing that you want to focus on? Can you clear out your brain by offloading all these other things? You know, everyone's got Salesforce. Nobody wants to build the integrations. That's not a part of any company, is managing their own Salesforce integrations. Just buy that, get that figured out somewhere else. But there's also really interesting questions between, like, okay, do you buy it from a bespoke company? Do you get a consulting firm to build this for you? Do you go with an open source thing and try to hack it on your top? A lot of that still comes back to your philosophy as a company. Who is it we want to be? As a team, do we want to scale up in this? If, you know, sometimes it's worth it to say, like, it's going to take us longer, it's probably not going to save us a ton of money, but people want to do this. They want to give it a shot. I'm not talking resume-driven development here, but there's something to be said for using the strengths in the way that people want to use them, allowing them to grow and allowing them to stretch. So, you know, in a world where everything's free, you just offload everything except what you need to focus on as a business. But when it's not, you just need to figure out what is the truest to who we are, what can we afford, and what can we get away with for now, not buying until we're really going to need it later.
I want to follow up with Sarah. One specific thing for that kind of build versus buy. Many times the leader CTOs, they may have this overall strategy, but they're not the ones doing the research, right? Typically, it's like the senior folks like us, senior ICs who are like on the ground seeing these problems, are the ones to really evaluate it. Sarah, do you have kind of have an approach where you kind of evaluate this build versus buy a vendor, or like whether or not you should build it?
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with what Ben was saying too. But the main things that I really focus on is how quickly can I get up and running, right? Like, for example, if you're looking at something like Databricks, where everything is managed, right, versus something that it might be EMR or even Spark on, like, you know, a virtual machine somewhere, I would definitely prefer to go and get Databricks, because EMR and Spark by themselves managing that, how much time does that take away from what I'm doing, right? How much time, like, do you want me to spend time working on your ad hoc requests, or do you want me to spend time on managing that infrastructure, right? So
Devil's bargain right there.
What?
Devil's bargain right there. Do you really want to do either of those? Really?
Well, you know, like sometimes, you know, you have to know what the ad hoc request is so that you can automate it, right? Full circle right there. But that's really what I'm concerned with, right? Is like, how quickly can we get not only me, but also the other people who need to use it, so on board and up and running. So because productivity is, at the end of the day, is really what is important as a, you know, at a high growth startup. So no.
Time is its own currency. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Richad, but the company you're at, it's much larger than a startup, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And so you know, a lot of us come from the startup world. How does this play out in the kind of the larger companies? I imagine there's probably like more bureaucracy to kind of go through to even consider these things.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what I did with a brief summary of what I did with geospatial analytics, location data. Basically, I had a specific use case in mind, and then I asked the same data scientist to do the same thing with two different tools. And one of them was an order of magnitude more expensive than the other, and also have been around longer. And the other was sort of probably more developer friendly, you know, cloud first and all that. And the conclusion was pretty clear. But then COVID happened and we ended up buying neither of them, right? So buy versus build, it really changes. But in a larger company, you're generally thinking you have more latitude to make longer term decisions. So for example, in a startup, it's very likely that you would want to, ideally, you would buy at a variable rate that would scale with you, right? Because this means you require fewer people. And in the beginning, your costs will be quite low, right? So buying things that you don't want to manage at a variable rate. In larger companies, they often want to make those longer term investments and bring things in-house. So let's say that, you know, you have messy data, you want to centralize it, put on the cloud, or move it off-prem or something like that. It's very common still somehow. You know, you might want to get data engineers. You want to hire and build your own data engineering team to build that expertise, because you might see them eventually becoming owners of the data sources, right? This would allow sort of building out a governance function, to have sort of quality in place and a connection to the business units and the sources of the data, that sort of thing, right? So you think about like the whole organizational structure, and then it's more likely that you're going to build. If you look at how big tech does it, firstly, they're often on the forefront of building out these capabilities. I mean, that's where a lot of our open source frameworks come from in the first place. It's like this company built this thing for themselves. And they're like, you know what? Let's build some cache and like maybe get some improvements, decentralized, let's like open source it, right? So they're building in-house. So the more people you have, the more you can build. And the more money you have, the more you can build. The only real question is, do you want to build that capability, as Ben said? So I would say that really the ultimate way to decide if you have the money is, do we still want to be managing or doing this 5 years from now? Do we gain a competitive advantage from managing this ourselves versus having someone else do it?
There's so many fascinating case studies out there for this too. I mean, just look at how AWS came to be. You look at how Airflow made its way out into the world. Like, it's fascinating, you know?
So Ben, actually, I have a follow-up question for you. Is, you know, us data nerds here, we understand the nuances of this build versus buy and like why we do these things, but you're in the C-suite, you're working with people, your colleagues are not always data people. How do you communicate these needs in the C-suite so that they understand why it's worth buying something so expensive or giving away so much budget to have people build these things?
I mean, there's a cost to not doing it, right? For all of these things, there's a cost to not doing it. So it's either capability, it's time, it's distracting from the other things you want to do. So like, especially in the startup world, it's like, well, do we want to get this done or do we not want to get it done? If we want to get it done, here's what it's going to take. Can we make it happen? So everybody's rowing together. You know, if everyone's rowing together, then you just say, well, here's where we're pointed and here's the rock we need to get around. Here's our options. Let's get through this one together. It's not terribly hard. I mean, maybe I'm biased because I work at analytics companies and this is our core of who we are. So everyone's like, oh yeah, we want to be able to do that. And that costs $15,000 a year as opposed to hiring an entire software engineering team and waiting 3 months for them to build this for us. Done. Let's spend it. Shout out to
So to kind of go to our next question, because I think this ties in well. Investment to scale data infrastructure is unique because it requires high upfront costs for often long-term ROI. How do you get buy-in from leadership to make such investments when the pain of data scaling isn't felt yet by the broader organization? And I'm kick that over to Richad.
You're asking Mr. Big Company about getting buy-in? Nice. You other people have it really easy, I think. Probably you have it really easy. Well, let's see. There's a couple options. Nothing speaks like the pain of experience, right? So I think the best way to do this is to simply give an executive a slow app. Infrastructure sells itself.
That's genius.
It's like, oh, here's all these logical arguments, or you could just give them the slow app that you built MVP style, which you should, no matter how big your company is, right? And then you're, okay, is this valuable? Oh, yeah, yes. By the way, it's slow. In order to make it not slow, we need X, Y, Z. Also, so I would say like, so that's one way to do it. The more broad answer is storytelling, right? So you can, instead of giving them that experience, you can also paint a picture of what the experience will be like in a very concrete manner. Because ultimately, I think things that you can't see always come back to the things that you can, the outcomes, the dashboards, the ML, the performance. And so basically you have to often yourself think and do the creative work, hard work of figuring out how it ties to business outcomes, right? You also can tie it into, you know, where you want to be in 3 years. Like if you're defining a roadmap or you have one defined, you could point to those things and say, this will be very difficult to do with this many customers versus these few customers, or this is going to be really difficult when we scale to Europe and Asia versus just here, or whatever, right? So you basically like, you kind of use things that you know they already care about as hooks, and then you hang your idea on them, right? I think Ben gave a good example where, you know, it's like, oh, we hire the team ourselves, and then you draw out the cost for them, right? You sort of write it out, or you buy this thing, and maybe you try to point out or estimate, okay, where does buying the thing become more expensive, right? And you say, well, when we get there, by the time we get there, we'll be concerned about these other things, right? You try to make it fairly airtight. I mean, it's impossible to make it fully airtight, but ultimately buy-in is people's beliefs, and the beliefs are changed one person at a time, one experience and one story at a time. General principles, tips, I guess, work backwards from value, show, don't tell, you know, and hopefully you're working with a team with a long-term view, because if, back to the first question, if everyone's super reactive, it's going to be very difficult. There's no magic answer to convince anyone of anything. If we had that, then there would be peace in the world and stuff, right? But obviously you can't always convince everyone of everything you need. So ultimately it does depend a little bit on your environment. There's no perfect answer.
So I've dipped my toes in this water, and I found, at least where I was, the problem wasn't the money. The problem was getting all the other teams aligned to make it a priority for them too, because nothing exists in a world by itself. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you navigate this being a priority for you, for your executives, but there's some infrastructure guy over here who's like, get in line, man.
Oh
yeah, that does happen. Someone else should take it. Yeah, first.
I was gonna say, Sarah, like, how does someone else's issue become your issue as well? Because I imagine being on platforms, you have a lot of issues coming. You have all those monitors, right? They're ringing at you. You're reactive. What makes something like, hey, this other team's like really hurting, I should probably care about it too?
Usually it becomes, so usually how I look at it, so there's two questions, right? So one question I wanted to answer is the question that you asked, and then the other one is Ben. So before we go to your question specifically, is something that I also work with is buy-in, right? Like as a developer, I need to go and you know, like, let's see, we find DBT, right? And DBT is going to bring great productivity to our analysts, our scientists, and how do we get buy-in from them, right? And so sometimes, you know, one or two of them have already had that positive experience that we were talking about earlier, but sometimes people just like, they're like, this is one extra thing I have to do. Why do I have to do it, right? And a lot of the times it's really like big picture, like in the long run. I know right now it might seem that this is going to be a hurdle, but once you get good at this, we can optimize your pipeline or your process this way. And so with the DBT example, like you know, a lot of times we have a whole bunch of random visualizations everywhere. You know, figuring out what the SQL is behind those random visualizations, that's what a tool like DBT is great for. And so being able to be like, hey, like, you no longer have to go through each individual tab in your Tableau data sources. And now instead you can see them all in a grid lined up, ready to go. Like, and you can see the lineage with it, right? And so being able to pinpoint, this is exactly how this is going to help you. And we're trying to help you. Like, this is a team effort, and we're, you know, like we're trying to make this process smoother for you, right? And so that's kind of like how I would get, you know, buy-in, is talking and showing them this is better for you in the long run. And we're hearing your concerns. We're here, you know, we hear that the queries are taking forever and things like that. So really trying to listen and hear what their needs are, and getting a you know, tool, whether it's a, you know, DBT or like just the process itself, like that we're trying to help you. This is a team effort. So making sure that everyone knows that we're on the same team. Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I feel like we could talk about this for a very long time, just going back and forth, positive stories, negative stories. This is a challenging problem that we all face, but all great things must come to an end. And kind of in our last 5 minutes, I would love to hear some quick closing thoughts. So I'll start off with Richad, put you on the spot.
Well, I mean, I came into data science from the math stats side. So I was always, it was always like the end goal for me was always to learn something new about the world. Like, fit a model, you look at the feature importances, or it does something, and you're sort of surprised by it, and you think, here's like a learning opportunity. That's the moment that always gets me, right? Infrastructure supports that. Ultimately, is to support decision making. It's to support features and services, and so sometimes it gets short shrift, right? So I'm really happy to see in the last, I guess, really 5 to 7 years, really the infrastructure startup scene is just like, right? You know, the next scene I hope is to find is the data cleaning and modeling startup scene, but that's really hard to automate, right? So I'm just really glad that people are talking about this, and we're always trying to add layers of abstraction and tooling to make everyone's lives easier.
Awesome. Sarah, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I just wanted to know that, you know, as a data platform engineer, it's an iterative process. It will always be an iterative process. And so like giving us the you know, the power to strength to get us through that first step is always going to be probably the biggest hurdle, but then afterwards it's going to be a smooth ride. So, or smoother, right, I should say. And so, you know, giving us the autonomy and the trust to do, you know, investigate those tools as we need, so that we can help and make, you know, better decisions about the products that we use. And it's always a teamwork. It's never be a silo. So those are my last closing thoughts.
Love it. Ben, close us out.
Yeah, so failing to scale looks very differently in different scenarios. You got to keep an open mind about what failing to scale means. You got to talk to different parts of your organization to make sure you're hearing it from them before it hits the fan. You know, you gotta, like we've spoken about, it can be, you know, slow APIs. It can be spending too much time on maintenance. It can be, we're not getting through our backlog. So be aware, talk to people, and try to deal with the problem before it gets too big.
Thank you so much, everyone here. For folks in the audience, again, please reach out to us on LinkedIn or in the chat. Happy to talk with other fellow data nerds. And again, thank you, Data Team Summit, for this platform for us to kind of share our passions about data. It's been super fun. So thanks. And thank you all for tuning in. All right.